Dehumanization is key to motivating people to participate and be complicit in genocide. In its campaign in the Gaza Strip, multiple top-ranking Israeli officials have clearly dehumanized members of Hamas, the militant group it's claiming to fight.
They are savages.
These are not freedom fighters. These are terrorists, the worst enemies of humanity that one can imagine.
This is brutal, cruel, and sadistic violence, and it's a reminder of what we are facing.
By dehumanizing the targeted group, all of a sudden any kind of actions that otherwise would be seen as inhumane becomes permissible. But then, how does the Israeli government justify the collective punishment inflicted on the Gazan population?
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
In justifying such violent acts, the state of Israel deploys rhetoric that actually humanizes Gazan civilians. Gazans aren't animalistic, they aren't monsters, that's Hamas, says Israel. And Zionists, those sympathetic to Israel, will point to that rhetorical distinction as a testament to how ethical Israel is. Rhetorical argues that violence doesn't necessitate dehumanization if the violence can be framed as morally righteous. The study found that respondents were able to morally justify drone strikes against terrorists without dehumanizing the terrorists. I think a similar kind of rhetoric of righteousness has been playing out during this war. By being fully aware moral agents, the Palestinians aren't only complicit, but are willing participants and allies of Hamas. Hamas is barbaric, they're beyond reason. The Palestinian civilian, well, they had a choice, and they chose and continue to choose siding with what Israel labels as monstrous.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat.
It is that device which allows Israeli officials to switch so seamlessly between dehumanizing Hamas and holding an entire nation morally responsible. Take a look at it here from the Israeli military's coordinator of government activities in the territories.
اختطاف الأطفال والنساء وكبار السن ومعاملتهم بشكل سيء وقتلهن هذا إشي غير إنساني بالمرة. ما في ولا أي مبرر لهيك عمل. حماس تحولت لداعش وسكان غزة بدل ما يصدمهم الإشي عم بيحتفلوا. مع هيك وحوش بشرية رايحين نتعامل كيف لازم. إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة ومش راح يكون في عندكم كهرباء ولا مي بس دمار. بدكم جهنم راح تحصلوا على جهنم.
Here is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu openly conflating Hamas and Palestinians from both Gaza and the West Bank, showing this rhetoric of the choice the Palestinians made in supporting the Hamas savages.
Look, the two-state solution that people talk about is basically would be the greatest reward for the terrorists that you can imagine. 80% of Palestinians in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank support the savagery. Giving them a state would do two things. One, it would be a tremendous reward, a historic precedent of giving those people who committed the worst massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust on a single day, giving them a prize.
The Israeli government is able to portray Hamas as monstrous barbarians not worthy of humanity, and the people of Gaza as broadly willing accomplices who therefore must be righteously punished for their participation. This seemingly paradoxically dehumanizes Gazans. They lose their human characteristics insofar as they side with the enemy, which, according to the rhetoric of top Israeli officials, is all of them. This conflationary rhetoric is essential to the international image put out by Israel, which provides the messaging which its allies can use to justify complicity. But such conflationary rhetoric also betrays Israel's intent to destroy in whole or in part the Palestinian people in Gaza. You see the statements that various officials make about Hamas, that they need to be destroyed, obliterated, that they're the forces of darkness. Necessarily by conflating the Palestinians with that group, by humanizing them to the extent of suggesting they actively choose to side with such a force, Palestinians are, likewise under this narrative, deserving of destruction and cleansing. Thus, while this differentiation is pointed by Zionists and those sympathetic to Israel as a strength of the current regime, I think in the ways in which it's been deployed in certain contexts, it contrarily demonstrates the genocidal intent and ambitions held by the Israeli government. This argument is furthered by the biblical invocations made by numerous ministers, chief amongst them Benjamin Netanyahu.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you.
In the context of a counter-invasion, where you've had officials speaking about shutting off food and water and electricity for all of Gaza, when you've had internal security documents supporting the proposition of the mass relocations of Gazans into the Sinai Desert, and this environment of conflationary rhetoric which differentiates civilians from militants in a way which still implicates civilians, invoking the scripture which calls for wiping out a people whose armed forces wronged the kingdom of Israel is evidence of genocidal intent. Referencing Amalek has, controversially, been used in other settings such as in Holocaust museums. The reasoning given here is that God was with the Israelites even in their darkest times, like when the Amalekites attacked them. But no counter-invasion or military action against Germany was proposed or in the works when such references were made, so you couldn't fairly argue that Holocaust victims were genocidal against Germans. In the context of an invasion which used an attack on the Jewish people as pretext, where militants and civilians are both held responsible, i.e. what the Kingdom of Israel did when genociding the Amalekites, the rhetoric employed here is evidently directly genocidal.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his address to the Israeli forces on 28 October 2023, preparing for the invasion of Gaza, urged the soldiers to remember what Amalek has done to you. This refers to the biblical command by God to Saul for the retaliatory destruction of an entire group of people known as the Amalekites. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. The genocidal invocation to Amalek was anything but idle. It was repeated by Mr. Netanyahu in a letter to the Israeli Armed Forces on 3 November 2023.
We always recognize the language and rhetoric as genocidal in retrospect. We always go back and question how we could possibly allow these things to happen. I think we've seen in real time how otherwise moderate or normal people can be rallied so quickly to support a fascist government which has no intention to reach any kind of solution. It's sobering, but it shouldn't be surprising.